did the first interview, maybe 3 years in the medical
Who
school.
was that one? Do you remember? Who the first interview was with?
It was the guys that did Fire in the Valley, which turned out they grossly distorted everything. And I didn't do any more interviews that way after that for a while.
Yeah, I have Fire in the Valley out in the car, matter of fact, and I was going to ask you.
Did you get the revised one they came out with?
I'm not sure. It's from '84. I don't know if it's the first one or second one.
That would have been the first one. They came out with a revised article that threw out all that stuff in the original one, and they actually acknowledged in a revised thing that the Altair was the first one. The real problem was they were trying to say a fire in the valley being Silicon Valley, and they had to problem was the valley was the Rio Grande Valley, and we were 2 years ahead of anybody else.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing. I guess because the rest of the book kind of does center around Silicon Valley and California.
Yeah.
You're the only real exception, significant exception, I guess. Yeah. What have you? You read Fire in the Valley, so there's some things that.
I've looked at pieces of it. It's so grossly inaccurate that it's.
Are there other accounts of MITS and Altair that you can think of that are also incorrect?
Well, I haven't seen really a good history of any of the early computing. The best history probably of the early computing is in the Time Life series, but they kind of miss the point that the Altair was really the first personal computer. They operate on the assumption the first personal computer occurred later. And I don't think any of those people that have written stuff early on, they all leave, and part of this is probably been generated by people that came after that had their own axe to grind or were trying to convince people they were the first computer, imply that the early machines were not capable of doing anything other than watch a bunch of lights flash, because that's kind of how they're always described.
That's kind of beside the point, though, really. Well, I mean, whether it did or didn't, yeah.
The thing that's frustrating about that, the original Altair A or B, either one of those two machines, actually there was original Altair,
right,
there was an A and there was a B. But the original Altair and the design of that original Altair, people have kind of missed the whole thing. The design was fairly elegant in this sense. We didn't know what software people were going to put on. We didn't know what they were going to try to do. So instead of using any memory inside the machine for a startup ROM, there was none. The machine, you could do anything you wanted to with one of those machines. You could load any software. There was no hardware on that machine that interfered with the operation of the thing in any way.
It was totally user configurable.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you didn't want to do that yourself, you wanted to do it with us, you loaded the front panel switches, you loaded the boot-in loader. Now, the reason for doing that, which now doesn't seems kind of odd, but anybody that worked with mini computers, that's what we did was model the system after a mini computer, but modified the model in that we didn't have any internal memory at all, or operated as if there was no ROM memory at all,
right,
where you could do anything, where you weren't dependent on anybody.
Right.
And that was an elegant design, but from the very day one, all those machines could be configured with a ROM, because the machine, when you hit reset, always started at 0, which is that's the basis for all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
So when you hit reset, if you want to put a ROM in there and bring the thing up without those front panel switches, that was great. You could do that. There was never anything.
Let me ask you something, only because it just popped in my head. I want to ask you why I remember it. A friend of mine, and I'd be interested myself, he cannot find that Chase the Bit program anywhere. Would you have that anywhere listed?
I might, but I haven't played with it out here.
Okay, well, if you think of it down the road, email it or something. But I have a writer now.
I tell you, the first program that was
regular.
ever run on a personal computer, I can remember that. I can give you that one off the top of my head.
What's that?
It's called Jump to Zero. The first time we tested the Altair. We didn't have any test equipment.
Oh yeah, I'll write that down then.
We didn't have any test equipment when we did the Altair. We didn't have a scope that would look at the signals that were in there. Matter of fact, some of the noise problems we had in the early versions was because we didn't have any equipment that we couldn't see the stuff.
That's why that guy. I think the stories in Fire in the Valley are Hackers. I think it's in Hackers. Have you read the book Hackers? It's a good book. Whether or not it's totally accurate, I don't know. But a guy at the Homebrew Computer Club, he took his Altair and made it make music because of the FM interference. He's able to do something next to a radio.
Yeah. Well, that's true. As a matter of fact, that's even true of one of these machines. You take one of the machines right now, there's a lot of RF that comes out of it, even if you meet the government's requirements. Mm-hmm. The last designs that I did, the requirements are pretty stringent now on machines. They've changed, but all those machines, you kind of an interest. This is total aside, has nothing to do with anything. When I was in the Air Force, I designed one of the things I designed were laser power supplies for laser weapons. These were firing flash tubes, and we were hitting flash tubes, and these numbers may not be exactly right, but it seems like 3,000 or 4,000 amps into the flash tubes with about, I think they were 10,000 or 15,000 volts. A lot of energy, right? Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, there was so much energy, we were pulsing the flash tubes at 30 frames a second or 30 times a second, that the cables that ran in the trailer literally beat the trailer apart. The vibration, right, banging like that. They would literally, over a period of an hour or two, run and tear the trailer. And my big concern, I was using an 8-bit machine for a fire control machine. And my big concern was this big pulse we were generating was going to screw that up. It turns out if a computer will tolerate itself, it'll tolerate anything. Because the noise level inside the computer is so great, there's nothing that approaches it in a short distances. Your DIDTs, I don't know whether what kind of education you have, but the rate of change of current.
I have some electronics training just because of the military.
Okay, well the DIDT on a pulse, when it goes up, the rate of change of current, which establishes the strength of the magnetic field, are intense, even in even the early machines. So even though the total currents weren't high, the noise they generate is enormous. So anyway, the net effect is the computer will tolerate itself. There's almost nothing that'll screw it up. Now that's not true of the magnetic memories and stuff like that, but the logic itself is pretty tolerant of external noise. Anyway, that was one of the problems with the original Altair. We didn't have any test equipment in this to do that. Matter of fact, it was designed using a digital logic analyzer that we had in Popular Electronics that used one of the old calculator cases, handheld cases. And there was a bit detector. We just sample, and what you do is get the up or down bit pattern. Have you ever used a logic analyzer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fixed radios in the Army, so not extensive electronics, but it's basically plug and chuck cards.
Well, that's the way the Altair was designed anyway. A good bit of the design was done with that. But the first program we wrote was a thing called Jump to Zero. And the command is octal 303, which is 11000011. And that says jump. And so you put jump as location 0. So when the machine comes up, it reads the instruction in 0. It detects that as being, it assumes that's going to be an instruction when it first powers up. That's the only assumption a computer makes, is at that location you're going to have a jump or a command of some kind. The first command was jump, and the next two bytes would be the address. It was a 64-bit address, or a 65,000 possibility.
Right.
16-bit address. You set those all to 0, so what it would do is say jump 00, which would come back to the first, and then we just sit there and cycle them. It was just the first three bytes of memory.
Oh, so long as it's doing that, it's operating, for the most part, operating properly.
Yeah, it was a pretty good test. So it's a test we used for checking machines out real quick. I mean, it didn't check every switch and every bit of logic machine, but it told you if the machine was grossly, if the clocks were okay, and
right.
If it was reading memory okay and writing memory okay and stuff like that.
I'll have to write that down before we leave you today. I guess my mind work jumps around too, so I don't know if yours does. But let me go. I'll knock out some of these questions here. When did you begin your relationship with Popular Electronics? Did you also write ever for radio electronics? How did that kind of come about initially?
We wrote articles for both radio electronics and Popular Electronics. As a matter of fact, I've written articles for radio electronics. Recently, also for modern electronics, I wrote a series of articles for radio electronics on a EKG machine that you could hook up to your own personal computer. And that was a series of articles that came out 3 or 4 years ago. Three or four articles in that series. But I wrote for both those, and also for modern electronics. We wrote a series of articles. To answer your question.
Yeah. Well, I read that as far as when you met Leslie Solomon, he actually came to see Forrest Mims.
Right.
And but then you guys met and hit it off real good, and that kind of was an initial establishment of a good relationship leading up to the Altair article and all. Do you still talk to Leslie Solomon at all, or Art
I've talked to Les
Salzberg?
in years.
They're still around though, right? Both of those guys?
Les was retiring. I understand he spent part of the year in Boca Raton and part of the year somewhere else. And I had a phone number for him. As a matter of fact, it was one of the reporters that I've seen fairly recently. And I call the number, and Les saw I've got 2 numbers from him, but I call the number, and he wasn't there, and I never have called him back. But I haven't talked to Les in probably 15 years at least. Maybe longer ago than that. I haven't talked to hardly any of those people after I moved back here. One kind of a sign we started talking, I got off the subject, was right after I came back, there was an article in Playboy that would have been probably 78 or 79, because it was pretty soon after I came back to Georgia.
And it was about you?
It was about personal computers.
Oh, okay.
And the article talked about how that MITS was the company that created the first personal computer. Now you got to understand, if you've been looking at this in 1976, 77, 78, there ain't anybody in the universe that would have questioned where personal computers come from. It's only been recently that's become a question. But people who were close to the industry before it happened, nobody thought Apple did it. I mean, that's kind of the standard thing right now.
Right, because they didn't come in until a few years later.
Matter of fact, Apple hadn't shipped their first machine when we were bought out by Pertec. The reason I know that, the guy that started Byte Magazine was a guy named Wayne Green.
Right.
And Wayne came by and saw me the day we were closing to go to, we were closing out the deal for Pertec, which was in like May of '77. And he had just come back from California, and I always like to talk to all the editors and people that were doing the travel, because that was a good source for G2. I mean, everybody did. Everybody knew that if you told them anything, it wasn't going to be secret, but you could kind of get a feel for what other people were doing. And he made the comment to me at the time, and it stuck with me. I probably wouldn't remember it if it had been that long since I thought about it, but it stuck with me a year or two later when I first saw him. He said there's an outfit called Apple with a couple of guys working in that garage out there that he thought was an interesting concept, and he thought if they could ever get the thing going, they would do all right. And he said they had advertised 2 or 3 times. Every time they advertised, they would withdraw. They would never ship it. But he thought they were getting ready to ship, so they were pretty close to shipping at the time. But we were selling out to Pertec. We were a big company by that, in that industry.
Right.
But anyway, that's just to get a perspective about where Apple fits in with
Yeah, they only played around pretty much with the Apple I. That was generally the beginning of their company when they said, yeah, let's really be serious and start a company. But they had like 200 Apple I's. They sold 50 to the Bite Shop in California, and then they toyed around with the other ones. And it wasn't until the Apple II in mid '77 or late '77 or whatever. Like I said, they didn't ship till probably after you left MITS. Then of course that's when they took off. And they had a lot of help.
They got a lot of financing.
Yeah, and they were in the right place at the right. I mean, they met some key individuals that if it weren't for them, they would have never taken off. They're just two hippies in that garage.
Well, the first thing that happened with MITS when Pertec took us over was they killed the dealer network. We'd set up the first deal. If you pick anything you want to in personal computer, and I made this offer to a number of people. You tell me something that you think somebody else did the first, and I can almost guarantee you it was done first at MITS. And the dealerships were certainly first. I don't think anybody would question it. All the original dealerships that were set up were Altair dealerships. And we were the first one to have the concept of dealerships. But anyway, I keep getting away from my story. This thing came out in Playboy. Like I say, it was probably '78. And it gave us credit, and it was a comment in the article, something to the effect that they didn't think that they suspected we didn't have an idea how big the industry was going to be at that time or something like that. Well, about 4 or 5 years later, and every time something bad came out, and I got so I can even quit looking at it, they had a big article with Steve Jobs that was an interview with Steve Jobs, the inventor of the personal computer, which just pissed me off.
Really? I'll have to try to look that up.
But anyway, it just talks about how he invented the personal computer and all, and their own magazine told them that was wrong.
Right.
Well,
he's also credited with inventing the Macintosh, which he did not do at all. I mean, he took over the project, but he didn't create it. It wasn't his brainchild or anything. It was another guy who actually started it in the late '70s, the whole Mac thing.
Is that right?
The Macintosh was originally supposed to be just a utilitarian, just a person's computer, inexpensive, like $1,000, 8-bit little computer. It's going to have a cassette drive, be very simple and inexpensive.
The first one to do the cassette drive.
Yeah, but then it came out at $2,500 and a lot more. I'm a big Mac person, so I like the Mac, but it wasn't exactly what it was originally. Steve Jobs did not deliver the Macintosh, and it's the way it was initially going to be. Let me answer this question, since I've read in a couple places that you're a great designer, engineer, all positives except on the business aspect. They said, it wasn't the best businessman or wasn't a great businessman or something, which obviously you had to be at least somewhat decent businessman because you had you built MITS up to a certain extent. So do you kind of resent that when people say that about you, or do you feel like...
some of that's come from me because my theory, I think there's plenty of data to support this, is you find an entrepreneur that's a good businessman, and that guy will be probably, because none of them are. I mean, all entrepreneurs, good businessmen will never start companies either by the same, it's kind of but there's a point you reach with a company, and the companies that are successful, I think, and I've thought this for years before any of this, before we were even bought out by Pertec, that people that have the entrepreneurial spirit to get things going are not the same group to do the day-to-day maintenance. They're not very smooth. It's just not. It's a different kind of mentality at all. Things that work good when you're trying to get things up and running, where you're doing everything by the seat of your pants and making really gutsy decisions or stupid things to do. It's a stupid management style when you got an established company. It's just dumb to do that.
Yeah, I think that's true with a lot. I think people are generally good managers with an established business, and then you have gutsy entrepreneurs who are good with startups. And Let me ask you this question too, because this is one I was
Whatever it's worth, I'd hired my own replacement at the time. Pertec took over a guy named Bob Tinley, who was president of the bank that we've been using there in New Mexico, and I'd hired him. I understood the problem, and I hired him to replace me. And I didn't make any bones about it at the time that I was not. That was not my forte. As a matter of fact, Bill Yates, not Gates, Bill Yates was the other partner in MITS. He bought out after I sold out.
Bill Yates?
Bill Yates.
Right, okay.
After I sold out, or bought out the other guys that were involved in MITS, then I sold Bill Yates 15% interest in the company, I think for $1,000 or a number like that. And that's what we used to buy the parts to build that calculator. Mm-hmm. And Bill stayed with me up until the time I left, and he stayed with Pertec. Matter of fact, Pertec had it modeled. He was the guru of what was going on, so they weren't too concerned about losing me at the time because they felt like they still had the guru.
Right.
But Bill had a point there. Well, Bill came up to me one day. This was maybe a few months before we sold out, and said, "Ed, this isn't any fun anymore." And he was really right. It was a lot of fun initially developing a company.
Because that's how you felt as well. That's why you wanted. You're ready to get away from that.
All I was doing was dealing with problems. We were having people threatening to strike because they found out some girl that worked next to them on the production line was making a nickel an hour more than they were, and we had the OEO on our back because we had some guy apparently had told somebody he was going to start a union, and I fired him, and I fired him maybe a month or two after he'd had some witnesses. He said that I had never heard a word. Nobody ever seriously thought about a union. I fired him because he kept giving customers bad information. He'd been warned about a half dozen times about it. But anyway, he went to the OEO or somebody, and they said it was anyway. It ended up that we had no problem showing there was good reason to fire him. It had nothing to do with his union active. It was that kind of nonsense. I didn't know. I didn't know he was. I might have fired him if I'd have known he was starting a union, but I didn't even know he was starting a union. But it was all that kind of. It was like running a soap opera, and.
You never intended to be running a large company with lots of employees. You have to deal with all their problems and all that stuff, right?
That was not my forte. And sometimes everybody kind of walk their middies about doing that kind of thing, but it's not much fun when you get there. It was fun designing products and getting them into production and all that kind of stuff. That's fun, but most of what we were doing was not fun.
Let me ask you this question, because I'm trying to. Looking back on this one particular business decision though of yours, as far as saying if you're going to sell Altair, that's all you can sell. Did you regret that, or looking back on it, you think, well, maybe I should have done that, or what's your viewpoint about that? Do you think
that may seem like a bigger deal now than it was then. At the time when it was originally done, there wasn't any competition. All we had to do was say, look, if you want to sell a machine, and actually we never said that. What we said was, if you want to sell Altairs, then we won't guarantee you exclusivity of Altair. If you're not going to sell Altairs exclusively, then we won't guarantee you exclusivity in your area. Okay. And that was interpreted as saying that they couldn't do that. Because, as a matter of fact, it almost had that effect because we accounted for 90% of the machines at that time. Probably up until maybe 6 months before we were acquired. If you had a dealership and you wanted to sell machines, they had to be Altairs. There wasn't anybody else there.
Matter of fact, it just came in my head too. What I've read. Yeah, someone said that. I don't know where I read it, but yeah, they said that you wanted to make your Altair dealerships use the automobile industry as your model because, and you can correct me, this is what I've read. I don't know if this is true. Which it kind of goes along though, because generally speaking, up until last 10 years or something, you sold Buick. That was it, or is it? Do you think that was that pretty much what you did model it after them, or?
No, I think our real concern was that if we gave somebody exclusive rights to an Altair territory,
they need to be exclusive back.
Yeah, because if you didn't do that, then if you gave somebody an exclusivity in an area, and they took some other machines, they could take you out of the market. So we just said, if you want an exclusive Altair dealership, then you've got to be, you've got to agree. If you want to be exclusive, if you don't want to be exclusive, then don't worry about competition being there because you're going to have it. And we had plenty of people that wanted to be dealers. Mm-hmm. We really set up dealers slowly, just as we could sort of support them. We probably never really supported our dealers like we never supported anybody. We could never keep up. We always had a backlog. No matter what we would do, we had a backlog. A lot of the management problems that existed in MITS, which none of those have been talked about that I know of in the press or anything, but a lot of the problems that I saw were related to the fact that I'd make a policy decision, even given that I was not a good manager from the standpoint of that kind of thing. And I'm not trying to be one way or the other. I mean, I don't think I was a terrible manager, but I mean, that was not my forte. It was not the thing I enjoyed doing. But we would make it, forget management.
Well, I don't think there's any shame in just like we were talking about that. You were better as a, you did all the hard work, starting the thing up and getting it going. It's easier to make, not necessarily, but you know what I'm saying, is maybe in some cases it's easier to walk in and just do that every day, keep things going. The hard part is just getting the idea and the work, the hard work of getting something going. So that's, like you said, that's what you enjoyed more too, coming up with the ideas and making them happen and stuff.
But what would happen is you'd make a decision today that made a lot of sense about the way you were going to, like a dealership decision. A month from now, everything had changed because we doubled our volume. We were doing, so all the decisions that seemed pretty logical this week, 2 or 3 weeks from now or 2 months from now were very illogical. And there was no, everything we did, that we set new ground rules for every decision we made. When we made the decision for the tape drive, the interface, what that interface was going to look like. There wasn't anybody else to ask about that. We were the only ones that had done that. You name it, the formats for disk, all of it. There was nobody else that had done it. It was all new ground. So, and some of those were not. And we were up in, with the exception of maybe the last 2 or 3 months of MITS, there was only one electrical engineer in the whole operation. I mean, I was the only electrical engineer in the whole operation of MITS. And we had, by that time, we were up to, including everything, maybe 500 or 600 employees, including all the dealerships. But
I didn't know you. That was all the dealerships, yeah.
We had 200 and some odd in Albuquerque just in the production facility now.
Yes, was the, I've read that you checked out the 4004, no way, that's primitive, 8008, then they came out with the 4040, you pretty much put them aside because they're just not sophisticated enough to run a personal computer. But at the time that you created the Altair, the 6800 was available. Was the biggest factor though in selecting the 8080 just because you could get them cheaper? Or did you seriously consider the 6800?
Yeah, we seriously considered 6800 after the article had actually already been submitted to Popular Electronics. And the thing that we actually ultimately built a 6800 machine.
Right.
The Altair 2 was a 6800 machine. And the thing that killed the 6800 probably finally kept us from doing much with it is the director of marketing stopped by Albuquerque. This was in the fall of I don't remember dates very well, but I remember a lot of these because there's certain key points that I can remember kind of when they occurred before or after that. This was in the fall of '74, which had been a couple of months before the Altair actually appeared. The article appeared. And the director of marketing for Motorola came in there, and we told him what we were doing. And the standard thing, nobody can believe this now, but every time I talk to anybody about the idea we want to sell a computer, people can have it home. They said, number one, nobody wants them. Number two, what can you do with them? And there's no market. I did not find a single person, I'm talking about from the time we started, until it was an established business that thought that was a good idea. Everybody thought it was a dumb idea. Nobody wanted computers. Now everybody thinks that's a totally logical thing to do.
Right.
If they could, and that's what frustrates me when people are taking credit for things. I mean, I had to fight constant battles. I mean, with vendors. The reason we ended up buying discs from Pertec was they were the only company who would talk to us. Everybody else laughed when we told them what we were going to do with them. The first printers we used were Okidata. Okidata was the only one that didn't laugh at me when I tried to. Okidata didn't even realize that they were the first supplier of printers for personal computers, but they were. That was because everybody else laughed at me.
Did you get to the point where you're just saying, no matter what happens, I'm just going to do it because I'm sick of them saying I can't? Or
yeah,
I'm going to do it because I'm sick of people saying it's not going to work?
Yeah, I thought there were some other idiots out there just like me that were fascinated with the idea of owning their own computer, and I was betting there were some other people in the world that were interested.
Well, it's kind of like, not that this is necessarily a good comparison, but like in me starting up a computer history, I tell people, oh yeah, I collect old computers, I'm interested in computer history, and they're like, why? But I said, I know there's got to be other people out there who find it interesting too, and I found them. So, and there's always people. It's a big world, other people are interested. You can always share interest, I think, from other people.
You were asking about something else. I was going to answer that now.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we both get off track. Well, I was asking about the 8080. The 6800.
Oh, the 6800. Anyway, the guy from Motorola came out, and I was just saying this is and he was kind of representative of the flavor. I told him what we were going to do, and he said, well, what are you going to do with it? I said, we're going to put BASIC on it. He said, well, you can't do that. He said, we've already looked internally in Motorola, and there's no way in the next few years, I mean, whatever number of years, that the technology was going to allow a higher language to run on a microprocessor. It was going to be impossible to do. And I remember having a long discussion with the guy. And he just wrote me off as a complete idiot, and it made me some, because there's the guy from Motorola, he was the director of marketing for the 6800, they had all the engineering, and they had decided what we said we were going to do was impossible to do, and we hadn't done it yet.
At that time you didn't have any BASIC at all.
We didn't have BASIC running, no. And this was months, a year before, this was 6 months or 7 months before Bill Gates and Paul Allen never even heard of the Altair for that matter.
Did they end up writing it though for the 6800 as well for your machine?
No, it was actually somebody that approached us with a copy of it, and it's a long story, but everybody that came to us with software, Paul Allen was in charge, was vice president of software. I hired him on the spot the day that they came down with their version. And everybody that came to us that looked like they had a piece of software, this is towards the end, he filtered off to Bill Gates, and that's how they started their company. And all their company was based on people who were bringing software to MITS, and they would take it and say that MITS didn't buy it directly. And some of this stuff I found out later. There's a basic called XYZ Basic, that the guys made 2 or 3 trips trying to meet me in Albuquerque, never could get to me. They always sent him to Paul Allen. Paul Allen said you have to go around the corner and see Bill Gates to sell it.
Have you ever talked to Bill Gates or Paul Allen since the last time? Back in the 70s, they moved back up to Washington State or whatever. You ever talked to him?
Yeah, I met Bill. He and I were at a wedding together. This was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. And,
he wasn't quite as big either then, huh?
No, he MS-DOS was just really getting off the ground good then. I guess MS-DOS was going pretty good by that time. This may have been closer to 10 years ago. But matter of fact, he had somebody. I saw him when I came in. He had somebody come over and tell him that he wanted to talk to him who he was, because he thought I wouldn't remember who he was. I mean, I told him I'm ready to little son of a bitch was. I should don't quote me. That's off the record.
Okay.
But I had kind of a bad flavor because they really, they stole that software, and they stole a lot of software, which left sort of a bad taste.
I'm not gonna bring it out as far as they stole anything.
But anyway, one of the things I've got, I've almost quit giving interviews recently. Again, I kind of go through this cycle because the big interviews now is my only claim to fame is the fact that I knew
Bill Gates.
Yeah, and then all people want me to do is to trash him, and there are plenty of things that I'm unhappy about, or I could get unhappy about, I guess, if I dwelt on. But I'm not going to make a career out of trashing those guys. And I still. And
it'd just be unhealthy for yourself anyway.
I still have some kind of friendly feelings. I mean, they're the residual. Microsoft's the residual MITS. That's all that's left of MITS is Microsoft.
Right.
And even though I'm not trying to take anything away from what they did. I mean, they built up there, but I mean that's where Microsoft came from. Was from micro instrumentation and other systems. And I answered the thing about 6800 though. But anyway, that was basically the reason we couldn't get Motorola interested in doing it.
And you got such a good deal in the 8080.
No, we didn't have that good a deal. I think we could have probably gotten a better deal on the 6800. Even though
really?
I don't think Motorola thought we were very serious. I didn't think.
Did you
nobody believed.
As far as comparing the two, the 8080, 6800, which one did you feel just as far as design-wise was better chip though, more efficient or easier to deal with?
The 6800 was much easier to interface to, and we had software folks internally look at the two, and I think the general feeling was, and this was even true, I think I had Bill and Paul look at it after, even this was later on, and they both kind of liked the 6800 over the 8080, at least some of the things that were in it. The problem is they hadn't written any software for it, so it's always easy to kind of look over the fence and say, and you don't see the flaws if you're just looking at it casually. But they thought
stick with it, yeah.
But we did have them look at it, and or had the software department look at it.
That on tape.
I thought it's good. I got a meeting.
I learned basic electronics, and electronics is not necessarily my forte. I know the general things about amperes and wattage and voltage and transistors and so on, but I'm certainly no engineer or anything. And at the point, fixing them was pretty. Like I say, it's all pluck and chuck. It's pretty much you don't go down to the component level. You just isolate the problem and pull out that card and make some adjustments here and there. I got pretty decent at it. It was okay, but it wasn't my thing. So, and actually, the Army wasn't my thing. I have to say.
How long were you?
4 years, and I'll never regret it. But I have to tell you, that last year I was pretty miserable in the Army.
Where were you?
I didn't let it. Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas, and Jacksonville's my hometown. So right when I got out, that's why I moved back to Jacksonville.
Well, Fort Bliss is a lot like Jacksonville.
Yeah, actually, in a lot of ways. Really, the weather's a lot like it. It's very dry, more dry. There's not as much greenery and stuff. But yeah, we like El Paso.
The ocean.
Yeah, that's the best thing about Jacksonville, though. That's why I like it there in Florida. because I love water, and that's what I miss the most, though, in El Paso. My big dream is to have a big sailboat one day and go down the intercoastal waterway to the Keys. So
That's something I do. My rate I'm getting in. If I ever get some money ahead, I'm going to do some world cruising. That's what I would like to do.
really, yeah, I don't know how to sail, but I'm going to learn by golly and get a sailboat one day.
I bought a 58-foot Hatteras after I sold when I moved back.
Really?
Here. Yeah, actually, I moved to Weaver County. And I used to go to the Bahamas all the time. I've got a 25-foot whaler now that it's got a wheeler drive. And I dive. And we run over the Bahamas we drive down to Miami, put the boat in Miami, and run over the Bahamas.
Yeah, that's nice.
Or go down the Keys.
That's about the size I'm looking at, starting with something like 23 to 26, something that's trailerable. You know, so you don't got to keep it up in a boat
No, this is
yard.
a power boat I'm talking about now.
Oh, okay.
Not a sailboat.
I may end up getting maybe a power boat for starters because I don't know how to sail. All right, let me ask you this: do you remember the TV typewriter article of '73? I guess it was in Pop Electronics or Radio. Do you remember anything about that, the TV typewriter, and did that influence you at all, or did you get excited about that when you saw that? Or? No.
I remember the TV typewriter. We were building, I think, at about the same time. We built a computer terminal, which we actually sold off and on up until, I guess, the time Pertex bought us out. It was used a Burroughs display, neon display. You know, sort of like the new, the new. It's a dot matrix display, and had a modem built into it where you put the phone receiver at the top of it.
Mm-hmm.
Which would have been a similar kind of product to that. But I remember that was one of Lancaster's.
Right. You know, he's still around.
Yeah.
Nuts and Bolts magazine. He's still writing for them, and he's got some little company. I can't think of what it's called, where he still publishes all his books and all kinds of stuff.
He was actually a guy. Some of the stuff that he did, as a matter of fact, a lot of what we did at MITS was modeled after. He was a pioneer in put together these kits and selling them through the magazines that way. And so he was kind of our model for that. The one thing I remember he did that was really impressive at the time, really got excited about, this would have been probably in mid-60s, I guess, was a decimal counter, which is made out of small-scale integrated circuits, but it would count from 0 to 10. You could put the stacks up together and make your own digital counter. And that was really neat. I mean, that doesn't sound like much now by modern standards. That was really a neat project. He did a number of fairly interesting projects. The TV typewriter, I don't remember it being anything I was particularly impressed by. I remember him doing that. There were some people later that used the TV typewriter as terminals, or a version, modified it. So, as a matter of fact, he may have even offered that as a version, as a terminal that we use on Altair.
I think he did. I think he actually did start producing some of them. I seem to remember reading some.
We used a teletype more than anything else on those initial machines, which people don't think about now, with those old, those KSR or ASRs.
33s, right?
Yeah, 33s that had the paper tape, gave you a way to input-output, as well as a way to load data off the paper tape. So it sounds pretty primitive now, but you could buy them on the used market, surplus market, for a few $100s.
That was like a gift from heaven at that time, huh?
Yeah.
The ultimate peripheral.
Yeah, I mean, that was, you get your line printer, your input-output device, and your mass storage.
Everything.
If you didn't mind 10 characters a second, that was the only.
Let's see, my last question on this little slip is, when you first decided, okay, I'm going to design a computer kit, what were the type of things that you said, I want it to have these features, and I don't want it to be like this? Things you know.
The basic ground rules for a personal computer from a technical standpoint is it had to be a real full-up computer that was fully expandable and had, at least in principle, the capability of doing anything any other general purpose mini computer had to do. And mini computer was a term that was popular then for 16-bit machines or 8-bit machines.
Right.
And that was our ground rule. We wanted to make a machine that was, from a user standpoint, was not degenerate at all. But the main difference between our machines and what we're out with, we use microprocessors and use the latest state of the art. We never used core memory, even though we did look at core. At the time we started doing the Altair, core memory was still significantly cheaper than.
Would you have static at first and then dynamic, or?
The original machines had 256 bytes of static. I mean, that's a minimal machine. That board came that way, and it was expandable on that board, I think, to 2K. And then we had 2K, 4K, and we ultimately had 16K boards before I left. Maybe even went to 32K boards, both static and dynamic. Both